Hello, everyone. We're at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar here today called Navigating Federal Contracting, Key Trends and Opportunities for Small Businesses. This is hosted by the James Madison University JMU Federal Dukes chapter, which is an alumni chapter here supporting James Madison University. Just a couple technology reminders before we get started. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and you should see in your Q&A window a way to submit your questions. Just a little footnote here: any question you submit will be seen by other attendees, so we just ask for you to submit positive and professional questions, and also just be aware that others will see the question as well. I did want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, ShorePoint. We are joined by Matt Brown, Chief Executive Officer for ShorePoint here. Matt, thank you very much for your sponsorship. You want to take a moment and just share a little bit about ShorePoint?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, and welcome to everybody to the webinar on a great topic. ShorePoint's excited to partner with JMU Federal Dukes to continue to further the connection between the university and the federal contracting community up here. ShorePoint is a cybersecurity services firm. We're primarily focused on providing defensive cybersecurity services to federal agencies and their missions. We have a workforce of over 200 employees, both here locally in the DMV and as well as throughout the country. And are excited to be a part of this today. We were also founded by several former JMU alums, including myself. So thanks all for joining. Back over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Matt. I'll be introducing myself in just a minute in case anybody's wondering who the other voice is that's speaking here. I did want to take a minute just to share with everyone about the JMU Federal Dukes. So just take a moment to get you a little oriented to the organization that is hosting this event. JMU Federal Dukes is an alumni association, as I mentioned, supporting the James Madison University, and it's really the first professional development and networking alumni chapter focused on the community of people that would include students, faculty, as well as employees of the federal government and the contractors that support them to provide professional development and networking opportunities across that rich community here, especially here in the DC and metro area, given the proximity of James Madison to DC and the large employment population here in the DC area. Our strategic priorities are really to provide an increasing awareness of the opportunities for students, as well as the school to partner with the federal government and its mission through the contracting community as well, and help prepare future employees for the opportunities that are available in supporting the government mission, either as a government employee or as a contractor supporting government agencies. We have a distinguished leadership team. You'll see me, Kevin Plexico. That's me in the lower left there. My day job is I'm responsible for information products at Deltek, a software company here in the DC area. I am a 1992 James Madison graduate with a degree in economics. So it seems like eons ago, but still have a great affinity for the university. You'll see Matt there, second from the top on the right-hand side. He's also involved in the leadership team for the JMU Federal Dukes, and we have a number of other leaders across industry that both come from government as well as the industry to support the initiatives that we outlined here earlier just a minute ago with JMU Federal Dukes Association. So really appreciate you joining us today. Hope we provide some content that's of use to you, especially given the timely transition that we find ourselves in with the new Trump administration, just a week or so away from taking office, and what that might mean for the industry and the employees in the federal community. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our content. I'll go ahead and kick it off with introductions, myself, Kevin Plexico, and then I'll introduce Ken Dodds, who is also joining us, and give him a chance to introduce himself. We're going to talk about some federal contracting trends that I think really are relevant to the community, given the transition. Some of it's specifically related to the presidential elections and the transition that's taking place, and others are sort of regulatory changes that have been in motion for in some cases years, that are starting to take shape, both in the form of regulation as well as just impact of regulation on competitive trends. And then Ken, with his expertise in the regulatory environment, is going to talk specifically about the implications and changes to small business policy and regulations as well. We will take questions at the end and have some conversation and dialogue around some of the topics we talk about. So please feel free to chime in if you have questions along the way. And we'll get to as many as we can, given our time constraints and out of respect for your time, wrapping up here around 2 o'clock. And as I mentioned, I'm Kevin Plexico. My day job is Senior Vice President of Information Products at Deltek, including the GovWin Market Intelligence research product. We're going to leverage some of my team's research for some of the content today. I am the program chair for the JMU Federal Dukes Alumni Association as well. Ken, had many chances to join you on panels like this. You're the Executive Vice President, General Counsel for the Coalition of Government Procurement. Also came from the SBA as head of policy for the SBA a few years ago. Maybe you can give just a moment of background on yourself as well as what the coalition is all about.
Yep, thank you, Kevin. I'm a 91 grad from JMU. Thank you for letting me join you. We've done this a couple of years in a row now. The coalition is a trade group basically for government contractors. It's a nonprofit. We have a couple hundred government contractor members. We comment on all kinds of procurement rules, advocating for common sense solutions for procurement, and provide training, webinars, and then we have conferences where we interact with industry on all kinds of issues, whether it's cybersecurity or medical procurement or VA issues or GSA issues. Before I joined the coalition, I was an attorney in SES at SBA for over 20 years, where I worked on a lot of the programs, rules, and policies that we're going to talk about today.
Great. Thanks, Ken. And thanks again for joining us today, and look forward to a conversation here. We're going to start with a little bit of conversation about the federal contracting environment, just to level set before we get into some of the nitty gritty. I wanted to share this sort of graphic of some of the top trends that my research team at Deltek has identified as some of the key themes and trends that we're expecting to shape the market in the next several years for the federal contracting community. I'll start with budget and spending uncertainty that seems to plague this industry as we each year approach the end of the fiscal year, wondering if Congress is going to pass appropriations. For fiscal year 2025, we are currently, as many of you probably know, are operating under a continuing resolution that Congress passed over the holiday break that extended funding until March. Now, if you're attuned to the federal contracting fiscal year and the federal spending fiscal year, you'll know that that's basically midway through the full year of the federal budget. So continuing resolution that goes through March represents roughly half of the year that agencies are operating under a continuing resolution. What that tends to do in terms of spending is agencies will hold a little bit tight on their money until they get line of sight on what their full year appropriations are going to be. So we typically see a relatively slow start to federal spending, and then it ramps up rather quickly as we get into the end of the fiscal year, when agencies have money that they have to use or lose it, and it disappears as they get into the 2026 season. The one thing I would comment on, just in terms of the level of budget that Congress is working towards, we are still operating under a bipartisan budget agreement that was reached just about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that set the caps on discretionary spending for fiscal year 24 and 25. For civilian agencies, 25 would be pretty much a flat year. I think it allowed about a 1% increase in discretionary spending. There was a bit more for defense spending with about 3%. That does not include additional funding that might be provided for disaster assistance and disaster relief, as well as some of the weapons support that we're providing to countries like Israel and Ukraine for the wars overseas. So expecting it to be a relatively modest year, even as Congress is waiting to finalize full year appropriations. I don't think the debate right now. So much is around the full year appropriations level, but obviously the devil's in the details when appropriators get involved as they try to inject a lot of other regulatory and legislative policies that our political leaders try to do on the annual basis when they have that leverage with funding. With the new administration, we're going to talk a bit more about this, but obviously we're ushering in a major policy change, change of control of the House, change of the control of the Senate, now controlled by the Republican Party. The new Congress took office here just a week or so ago. The inauguration is just another week and a half away, so that will sort of complete the senior leadership transition. But if you think about the way the administration transition unfolds, you recognize that this is a long tail of appointees and presidential appointees, and then those appointees having to get approved and appointed by Congress, and specifically the Senate. So while we have the new administration in place here in January, on January 20th, you really need to expect a long tail before President Trump has his leadership in place in the agencies, with all the political appointments that need to happen both at the cabinet level as well as lower levels in the same agencies where they have political appointments. So don't expect quick changes in terms of agency direction, but we do expect obviously a lot of executive orders, a lot of memoranda to come out that is going to, in some cases, undo things that the Biden administration had implemented, also putting in place new policies that we've heard much about during the campaigns and the election season. And then from a budgetary point of view, it's always important to think about the budget in the context of when a new administration takes office. So if you think about, for example, the 2025 budget, that was actually proposed by President Biden back in February of last year. And appropriators typically take up appropriations in late spring, early summer. Ideally, they'd get appropriations done by September 30th. But we know by looking back historically, that rarely happens on time. If you think about the FY 2026 budget, that was being produced by agencies based on guidance put forward by the Biden administration. So agencies have largely been working towards a budget that the Biden administration had given them guidance to produce. And typically we would see a president's budget come out in the February timeframe. Usually it's the first, second week of February. Typically when we have presidential transitions, that budget release gets delayed. The new administration wants to do a bit of work on those budgets to put their footprint on them. And we think that will take a little bit of time. So we don't really expect to see the president's budget until the springtime, maybe March or later. And it's really not until we see the next year budget, the fiscal year 2027 budget, that we expect the new administration and the Trump administration to really have a chance to put their fingerprints on a budget that fully implements their policies and does so with their new leadership in place to help implement those policies, sort of where the rubber meets the road within the agencies that are impacted. So typically a long tail of time that goes by before a new administration takes office and we really see the full effect of their policies woven into the budgets that the appropriators take up. We wanted to highlight a number of issues in the Trump administration that will impact businesses and the contracting community. Specifically, tax policy is expected to be one of the first items taken up by the administration, extending the existing corporate and individual tax cuts that were passed during the prior Trump administration. They're expiring, and we expect the Trump administration and Congress to enact an extension to those. This will be a good news tax extension for many businesses that pay taxes, and so we expect that to be put in place pretty quickly. We've all heard the discussion about tariffs, and those tariffs would not only have the potential of reducing demand for U.S. goods overseas, but it's not too much of a stretch to expect some of those countries to retaliate with with tariffs of their own that could make goods coming into the U.S. more expensive. And so for those of you in the contracting community that are getting your goods from some of those countries that might be on the list to receive tariffs, you might see some increasing costs if those retaliatory tariffs come into effect as well. Immigration has obviously been a major discussion during the elections and the campaign. The Trump administration has promised to rapidly increase immigration enforcement, including adding more border security agents, increasing investment in border security. You can expect more investment in the southern wall that we saw during the prior Trump administration, and also an acceleration of investment in removing illegal immigrants from the U.S. So those all are areas where we expect contractors to play a role if they so choose, and that the agencies are going to be looking at additional money and resources and labor to help them implement those policies that are put forward. There's been a lot of attention paid to the government efficiency, and specifically the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon Musk has been associated with. It is not a regulatory body in itself, but really just an organization that's going to provide actions and recommendations for the administration. If you're looking at areas where this might have an impact, I think there's going to be an opportunity for companies to help with ferreting out waste, fraud, and abuse in government programs. That's usually sort of the first opportunity that an administration can take without needing legislative support, to identify where there might be waste, fraud, and abuse in government spending on existing programs as a way of saving money. There's also been the promise of major reforms to government agencies, such as the elimination of the Department of Education. During the prior Trump administration, we saw a call for major cuts to the Department of State, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, that we expect to show up in a president's budget here in either the 2026 budget or possibly the 2027 budget, depending on how quickly they want to get their fingerprints into the budget process. And there's also potential, as we talk about the hiring freezes and potential reduction in government employees, especially things like bringing them back into the office, which might push government employees to look for jobs elsewhere in the commercial sector where they have more work flexibility. That often will lead to the government needing to draw on the resources and labor of contractors to continue to deliver and fulfill their mission requirements. So these are areas that could provide both opportunity as well as threats of reductions, depending on the nature of those recommendations. From a defense policy point of view, I think there's generally bipartisan support for increasing spending for the Defense Department, certainly for our own shoring up our own defenses, but there obviously has been a lot of debate over our support for Ukraine and Israel with weapon systems and resources there. So I think that's where you're going to likely see some debate in Congress, is where that defense spending goes to support foreign countries. And then from a regulatory point of view, the administration, or the new administration, has promised to look at streamlining regulatory policies, many of which were implemented during the Biden administration. I would look for areas specifically that were funded or put forward in the Inflation Reduction Act, which was largely about climate change and climate control and energy efficiency. So we expect there to be reductions for agencies like the EPA, and unwinding some of the climate provisions that were in the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as some other areas of deregulation that we think the administration will be pursuing that could have an impact on the contracting community. And then shifting gears from a regulatory update, I know Ken's going to talk more about this, but one of the things that we've seen as a result of the way government agencies have been evaluating joint ventures, particularly in some of the major IDIQ contracts that have been awarded recently, they've been giving small businesses the opportunity to partner up with large businesses to form a joint venture that essentially draws on the combined past performance of the small and large business to support that past performance evaluation and securing the win or the bid for the joint venture. The joint venture, the small business party, still has to do, I believe, 51% of the work, but obviously you, as a joint venture, partnered up with a large business that has a much richer and deeper past performance, definitely puts you in a much more advantaged position from a competitive point of view if you're able to draw on that past performance of the large prime to compete against the small business that maybe doesn't have that past performance. You can see the rapid ramp up in both dollars spent with joint ventures, as well as the increase in the number of joint venture awards and joint venture competitors in holding prime contracts. And I know, Ken, you're going to talk in a little bit about some of the initiatives that the SBA is putting in place to modify that, to maybe change that up a little bit. And then from a compliance point of view, just a couple areas I wanted to highlight before I bring Ken into the conversation to talk specifically about some of the small business updates. CMMC, the proposed rule has been finalized. That is expecting to be rolled out over the course of 2025. So if you are a company doing business with defense agencies and you're managing secure information or controlled unclassified information, this is something you definitely want to pay attention to if you haven't already, and exploring securing CMMC compliance for your company at some level that you might expect your contract requirements to come out of. So DoD will start to be inserting those requirements into RFPs during fiscal year 25. And if you want to be eligible to bid on those, you want to get ahead of this and start to prepare your company for those cybersecurity regulations that the defense agencies are going to be taking on. We're also seeing new FAR clauses roll out and a consolidation of federal acquisition regulations for supply chain cybersecurity regulations. So this is another area that will likely impact those of you who are working with companies that might be suppliers of products and parts to government agencies, to make sure you're complying with those supply chain requirements. And obviously there's going to be a greater focus on domestic manufacturing and restricting importing of products from countries we would consider sort of not as friendly as maybe some other ones. And then as we think about modernization to agencies' adoption of cloud computing, there's the rollout of the new FedRAMP modernization, and agencies are also starting to try to figure out how they can implement artificial intelligence. And there was a number of executive orders that came out by the Biden administration providing guidance and governance structures for agencies in terms of their adoption of AI. I know that's been a major hindrance for many agencies in adopting and moving quickly on AI, as some really laying the foundation for those governance models that they're going to need. And it would not surprise me at all if we start to see some kind of FedRAMP-like policy or guidance that comes out that really shapes how agencies can safely adopt artificial intelligence technologies. So Ken, I know you've got a tremendous amount of expertise from your background shaping policy at the Small Business Administration and now advising companies as well as agencies on improving procurement regulations. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to talk about I know you have just a variety of topics to talk about relative to small business policies. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I put together, some lists of some of the hot topics that I think are to watch out for. Starting with the rule of two and orders. This is an issue that goes back decades. Decades ago, people said the rule of two, which says if two or more can do it, you should set it aside. There were arguments that the rule of two applied at the contract level, not to orders. There were people that said the fair opportunity requirements required you to let everybody bid. You can't set things aside. Eventually, there were reports to Congress. There were presidential agency task force reports. And in 2010, there was a law passed that said agencies may set aside orders for small business. They used the word may instead of shall. In fact, in that same law, they changed shall to may for the Hub Zone program, which basically means it's discretionary. You can't protest it, is what usually that word means. And that's what GAO agreed with that in a protest on someone's decision not to set something aside. They said you can't protest that because it's discretionary. In addition to GAO, though, you can also go to the Court of Federal Claims and file a protest. And in a case called Tolliver, the Court of Federal Claims ruled differently. Now, that was some bad facts in that case. So the agency had tried to do a set aside and got protested. They tried to do a set aside and got protested, and then they went to a contract without small businesses. And Tolliver didn't allow that to happen or overruled that. It wasn't appealed to the federal circuit, so it's not necessarily binding on everyone. But the fact is, I think agencies are probably following that, because if someone could go to the Court of Federal Claims and challenge your decision, you might as well go ahead and follow the rule too. In January of this year, or last year, OMB issued a memo telling agencies to follow the Rule of 2 with respect to orders. And then in October, I think it was, SBA actually issued a proposed rule to, in fact, say that the Rule of 2 was mandatory with respect to orders. The comment period on that rule closed on Christmas Eve. There was a request to extend the comment period, and they did not extend the comment period. Now, in my experience, it takes like 6 months from the time the comment period closes to do a final rule. Best case scenario, because of all the analysis you have to do and so forth. But they may try to do a final rule before January 20th, before the administration changes. Assuming they don't, it'll be an open question. What do the SBA folks, the political appointees, think about whether the Rule of 2 is mandatory? What does the OFEP think about it? What do the members of the FAR Council, GSA, DOD, and NASA think about whether the Rule of 2 should say shall or whether it should be a may, discretionary? So that's something to look out for. In any case, it doesn't apply to the GSA schedule. It never has. The schedule says it's not mandatory, and these memos and rules have also exempted the GSA schedule, but something to look out for if something isn't issued in the next 2 weeks on that. With respect to the some of the other things that SBA does, they do goaling. One of the administration's, Biden administration's priorities was SDB, small disadvantaged business goaling. The statutory goal was 5%. The government typically did 9 to 10% each year. The Biden administration increased that every year until, like this fiscal year, it's actually, I think, 15%. And so it did cause agencies to increase their SDB spending by using the 8A program, you know, because that's the only way to really target SDBs. So you could do a sole source, or you do competitive 8A to increase your SDB spending. I'm fairly confident that's not going to be 15% once the Trump administration goes there. They're probably, I'm assuming, going to go back to the statutory just 5%. There have been constitutional issues around the 8A program with the ultimate decision. So we'll see what happens with respect to that program under the Trump administration. A couple other things to highlight. The SDVO goal is now 5%. It was previously 3%. The government typically does 4-ish%, you know, somewhere in there. A lot of that driven by the VA because they have to go vet first, but I think should be increased SDVO contracting, especially at places like DoD, to help the government meet that goal. You mentioned joint venture mentor-protégés, and SBA did not propose a rule around that, but they were doing tribal consultations, which they have to do whenever their rules impact the tribal community and the ANCs and the AHOs. And they asked for comments on whether mentor-protégé joint ventures should be reined in a little bit. So your position on that probably depends on whether some small businesses think by partnering with a large business, they're dominating these contracts, they're taking work away from real small businesses. If you're a small business and you have a mentor-protégé joint venture and it's successful, you're benefiting from it. And so you feel strongly that it should continue. They could do something around limiting how many you could have, or limiting the amount of time. Right now it's like 6 years, or you can do up to 12. Maybe they could limit that. Or they've thought about maybe should you not allow them to get on these long-term 10-year, 20-year contracts? Should we limit that? Nothing's been proposed. Again, this will come down to what the new folks at SBA think about that program, whether they're going to make any adjustments on eligibility and how much this can participate or not. So it remains to be seen. And then there was also some questions around the limitations on subcontracting, the non-manufacturer rule don't apply to small business set-asides below the SAT, and whether that should be continue or whether that should be reined in. Again, nothing's actually been proposed, so we'll see what the new folks at SBA think about that. Let's go on to the next slide. They did issue a final rule in December, I believe, that's going to be effective on the 16th SBA, and there's a lot in there. It was titled Hub Zone, but it went way beyond Hub Zone. So I'm just going to go quickly through some of the highlights. Again, I give you the site there if you want to go look at it. One thing they tried to address was this issue around what can a minority investor object to, and not have too much control over the business, because if you're an 8A or an SDVO or a woman-owned business, that individual is supposed to be controlling the business. Same with just general small businesses. If someone who's a large business has a minority interest in you, that's okay. They can own a minority of your company as long as they're not controlling it. If they control it, then you're affiliated. So what SBA tried to do here is set out what things the minority investor can have say-so in, and that goes to things like adding equity, bankruptcy, some of the things, state law protections that you have. So that's a good thing, and it applies across the board to all their programs. They also addressed recertification. That's an issue where if you're bought by another company and you're now large, you have to tell the government. The government's not going to get credit if you're no longer small for rewards to you. But there were some questions around, can I still compete for set-asides? And there's OHA decisions and GEO decisions saying you can. SBA did an interesting thing here. They differentiate between whether you're bought or you're merging with a small business or a large business. If you're being bought by another small business and now you're large, but you were small and they were small, you're going to still be eligible for options and for orders that are set aside, even though you're no longer small. If you happen to be bought by a large business, you're not eligible for orders and options that are set aside, but they delayed it by a year. So for the next year, you will be eligible. So that's kind of a unique thing that they did for the recertification issues when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. As I mentioned, the rule was primarily about hub zones. A hub zone is a firm that has a principal office in a hub zone, an underutilized business zone, and that has 35% of its employees residing in a hub zone. Some of the things that they tried to address were, what is an employee? It used to be full-time equivalent. It was at 40 hours. They proposed 80 hours a month, and after comment, they decided to leave it at 40 hours a month, but they put in a general requirement that they wanted it to be 10 hours a week, and then that also they want to make sure you're doing legitimate work as a hub zone employee. They had proposed to maybe create situations to deal with businesses where everyone teleworks, where they'd have to have a higher percentage. They decided not to do that. So in order to have a principal office, you have to have a place where the majority of your employees work. So it's going to be difficult for a firm that's entirely virtual to become a hub zone because they don't have a principal office, basically. They have a rule that does allow you to count what they call a legacy employee, which is an employee that used to live in a hub zone and that no longer does because either they moved or maybe the place that was a hub zone is no longer a hub zone. But because you employed them, you should be able to keep them. They had SBA proposed doing one legacy employee. They ended up, after comment, deciding to allow you to have up to 4 as long as you have one current employee. And then they changed the hub zone program to make it more like all the other programs where you basically when you submit an offer, you're saying you're eligible. The day of your offer, you have to have a principal office has to be in a hub zone, and 35% of your employees have to live in a hub zone. And they're going to relook at that every 3 years, like a lot of the other certificate programs, like SDVO and women-owned. Let's go to the next slide. They addressed some of the issues around the 8A program, which has a good character requirement. They've kind of, instead of focusing on whether there's any past criminal behavior, they're going to focus on whether the conduct was something that would lead to debarment or suspension from government. They're going to allow right of first refusal does not imperil your eligibility to remain in the 8A program. That does not give the minority owner too much control. That's okay to have for the 8A program. And then they increased the amount of equity or investment that a non-disadvantaged individual or company can have in an 8A concern. Previously, it was like 10 to 20. Now it's been increased up to 20 to 30. So more investment opportunities for non-disadvantaged individuals in these 8A companies. They addressed there was a proposal around value-added resellers, because there's a certain way that those folks can account for their revenue, where even though they're getting a lot of contract revenue, they don't have to count it for tax purposes. And that has caused confusion over the years, because you see these companies with a lot of contracts, but they're really taking a very small percentage. And a lot of the revenue is actually going to, let's say they're selling licenses for a large company, software licenses and things like that. So there was concern that SBA was going to start looking beyond your tax forms and saying, no, even though for tax purposes you're small, we're going to require you to do other documents. And the community was very adamant about not doing that. And so SBA agreed with that and said, we are going to use tax forms. If you can exclude it from your revenue for tax purposes, you're going to be allowed to do that for purposes of size. Obviously, if we think there's fraud, we're going to be able to look beyond those tax forms. And then let's go to the next slide. A couple things around, limitation on subcontracting, contracting agencies. When it's a multi-agent contract, is supposed to look at that. You can count leased employees. One of the big things they did is they did address joint ventures. There's been a lot of litigation recently around how you evaluate past performance and experience from joint ventures. The rules were very clear that you could use the mentor's experience and past performance, but how much could you require from the protege? And I think they've hopefully put a lot of that, all those cases to bed by saying they can rely solely on the past performance or experience of the mentor. They can require some level of experience and past performance from the protege, but it can't be at the same level as other offerors. And if you do require some, you have to give them kind of the same rating as you would give to other offerors. So a lot of the past bid protests around this has been how that's done, and hopefully this will lay that to rest. Let's go to the next slide.
Hey, Ken, can I ask one question on that particular one? Are you saying, when you say that are you talking about agencies when they're building their RFPs can sort of dictate in the RFP how much weight they give to the mentor's past performance versus the protege's past performance?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there were some cases where at GAO where an agency said, okay, we want 3 contracts, let's say of $10 million past performance or experience, and we want 1 from the protege and 2 for the mentor at the most, or something like that. And that was okay at GAO, but then someone went to the Court of Federal Claims in the Synergy case that involved Polaris, I believe, and said, well, no, the way the regs are written, you can't hold the protege to the same level. And the Court of Federal Claims agreed. And now by this rule, SBA is kind of agreeing too. So in that case, you'd have to have the protege can do, if you want to require them to do something, it can't be at the same level of other regular small business offerors. So maybe it would be one $5 million contractor and so forth. So they're trying to give agencies as much discretion as they want by setting it up so that you could just rely on the mentor if you want. You can require some from the protege, but it can't be at the same level as a regular other offeror. And that's they're trying to thread that needle with this new regulation.
Got it. Thank you.
And then let's go. The last thing I think I'm going to discuss is that there was also they called it a women-owned small business final rule that was effective in January 3rd. And it has to do with what employment someone can do if they're supposed to be owning and controlling, let's say, an 8A or an SDV or a women-owned small business. If you're in control of that, you should be controlling that and not working for someone else, especially if there's someone also working at that business that isn't a service civil veteran or isn't a woman or isn't a disadvantaged individual. And so this rule kind of sets up for all of those programs kind of the same rule on terms of what you can do, what you have to do. If you don't, there's going to be a presumption, but then you can overcome it and you just have to tell SBA that. And then there is some stuff in there about if you have a pending application for women on certification, you're able to submit offers on women on set-asides as well. I believe that's all I have in terms of my regulation update.
Great. Thanks, Ken. I got lots of questions and topics for you. I'm going to go ahead and ask people, if you have questions, please go ahead and post them in the Q&A window. We got about 20 minutes left to do some Q&A and wrap up. Ken, let me ask you this more maybe broad question. You mentioned one of the policies of the Biden administration that you expected to be unwound in the Trump administration was the Biden administration's focus on small disadvantaged business and sort of increasing the requirement for SDB contracting. I guess I'm curious what you expect from the new administration in terms of small business policies, any changes to the policies other than the SDB one, which we've sort of been expecting. And then I guess related to that, I would ask, you've been in government probably during some administration changes, and how do those administration changes, sort of where the rubber meets the road, impact the process that the process and the rulemaking that you have underway, during those transitions?
Yeah, I think typically in a Republican administration, at SBA, the Hub Zone program gets a lot of focus because that's a program that was created in the 90s to kind of counteract or be a rival or another opportunity to have a set-aside program that's not based on racial things. And obviously, the ultimate decision got rid of the presumption of disadvantage based on race. So that's no longer the case for 8A, but I would suspect that the Hub Zone program will get a renewed focus. Again, since this final rule just got passed, any changes would have to go through that same process where they propose something, get comment, and finalize it. So we'll see how they feel about the recent changes to the Hub Zone program. I think if it's an opportunity if we really do want to deregulate things. The biggest impediment to small business participation in the federal market is the overcomplication and the immense regulatory burden that everyone faces. When you look at a contract, if you're a commercial company and you come in to bid on a federal procurement and you see page after page of FAR clauses that have to do with things that you don't even understand, that have nothing to do with how you sell your services or goods to the government, that's what's really making the drastic reduction. And a lot of that is because of that. People are not entering the market or they're not staying in the market, I would say. So there's a big opportunity there to exempt small businesses or exempt commercial providers from some of these rules, as Congress intended years ago when they passed some of these laws to exempt commercial providers. And then over the years, they keep getting added to, and we keep burdening them with those regulations. So deregulation could help. I think it would help all government contractors. Lowering compliance costs would help all government contractors, but it would be particularly helpful to small businesses and to new entrants into the market.
And I guess related to that, one of the things that we sort of exchanged some discussion about is that issue of the compliance requirements and regulatory requirements create such a burden for companies competing in the market, and that it's actually getting more expensive with additional regulations like CMMC is one that I know many small businesses have had concerns about because of the both the requirements for them to adjust the way they operate internally and additional costs, also the potential for them to have to pay a third party to do an assessment on an annual basis. So it feels to me like not all regulations are the same. Some of the ones, for example, that maybe you're focused on, I don't know, we'll pick diversity in hiring or reporting on climate change. That was something else that came out under the Biden administration, are probably ripe for the Trump administration to unwind. But what about things like cybersecurity? That feels like a national security issue that the Trump administration is not likely to unwind. If you were kind of looking at your crystal ball and you look at some of the regulations, where do you see the most opportunity for deregulation, and where do you see sort of like a belief that this is so necessary, it's gonna be here to stay?
Yeah, I think you're right about cybersecurity. I mean, that's an issue whether you're dealing with government or your private life or you're just a commercial company. I mean, we just saw something the other day that Treasury was hacked. The people that do the sanctions were hacked by apparently a foreign government. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. That's a necessary thing that we have to have. Now, there are different ways to do it. There's been proposals of 1.0 and 2.0, and the new Trump, some of the new Trump people may have a different view at the margins on how to do it, but it's something that I don't think is going to go away. And I think that you can say the same for supply chain. I mean, every year there's a new law saying you can't do business with a Chinese company or some of the, Iran or some of these other companies. And there are national security implications with that. I mean, if all of our medicine is coming from China, if they decide not to sell it to us, we're not going to be in good shape. So if you really want to have a strong industrial base and be your strongest, there have to be ways to make things be made here. Now you have to recognize that that's going to cost more. If it was cheaper, we'd do it here. We're buying it from these other countries because it's less expensive to do it there. But for some of these things that have implications for our national security, our weapons systems, and our medical supply and our medical supply chain, those things are going to continue, I think, under Trump, just as they were a focus under Biden and before that.
Yeah, great. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about the joint ventures. I guess first of all, is with respect to the past performance and the bidding the rules that you talked about, is there a difference between a joint venture and a mentor-protégé joint venture with respect to those rules?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a nuance there because two small businesses can joint venture together, and as long as they're each small, they can participate and bid as a small business. The Mentor-Protégé joint venture program is unique because it allows your mentor can be a large business, and so you can bid on a set aside using the past performance and experience of some of the largest businesses in federal contracting as your partner, and you can bid on SDVO if you're an SDVO, or women-owned if you're woman-owned, or 8A and so forth. And the benefit to the mentor is that they can do up to 60%, let's say on a service contract, they can do up to 60% of the work, and you have to do, as the small business, 40% of that 50% limitation on subcontracting. So they can do more of the work basically on these set aside contracting orders than even the small businesses are doing. And the idea there is that the small business couldn't do it on their own. By doing up to 40% and managing it and being in control, they're going to benefit for their next contract by being able to use that past performance experience, going forward. So that's the idea there, is that it benefits both parties. The large business gets something, the small business gets something out of it as well.
Yeah. Okay. And we talked about joint ventures and the growth and their usage. I know we look at some, my analysts on the GovWin side see a lot of the awards for these IDIQs being composed of joint ventures as a way of having a small draw on the past performance of a larger business to be more competitive. Do you get the sense that the SBA has the feeling that maybe they've gone a little too far, or maybe that it's made it sort of unfortunately necessary for small businesses, sort of the unintended consequence of, well, you now have allowed it, and now it puts small businesses at a disadvantage unless they are in the Mentor-Protégé program for joint venture purposes?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we thought about Mentor-Protégé, it was created actually in the late 90s without any statute, and then eventually Congress, it was created for just the 8A program, and a lot of the other small businesses were like, hey, we'd like that too. So eventually Congress authorized it for everyone. I think when I used to think about Mentor-Protégé, it was a project-based thing. Like, let's put these two companies together to build a building or to build a database. It was, more less in time than. At the same time we were kicking off the Mentor-Protégé program, we also started getting these mandates for agencies to use these best-in-class contracts, which typically are like 10-year contracts. And so the idea now is that, and then now there's even some Mentor-Protégé joint ventures on the GSA schedule, which can go up to 20 years. So the idea is, if it's a joint venture, it's supposed to be for a small amount of time. Usually, in like the commercial world, it could be just for one project. And now you're allowed to be in it for 6 years, but you could be with the same mentor for an additional 6 years. So that's 12 years. And then any contract you get, you can keep performing. So now you're looking at performing these IDIQ contracts and getting orders for 10 years or 20 years, assuming the protege still is small or still qualifies. So I think there's definitely some folks that are questioning whether it should be used for some of these long-term contracts that go on for 10 years and so forth. But again, there's plenty of people that are very happy about it, that are using the program and very satisfied. And so those people are going to be heard too. So it really comes down to, what are the new political head of government contracting at SBA? What does the new general counsel at SBA think about it? And then if you're going to change it, is it going to be a major change, or are you going to just kind of tweak some things? Are you going to limit the contract lengths or do things like that to rein it in? So it remains to be seen. We'll know, we'll get a better idea once we know who those people are, and where they come from, and what their participation has been or not been in that program.
Yeah. And one last question on the joint ventures. I'm curious about if, one of the concerns that we've heard is, well, by requiring these companies to partner up, and they maybe never have worked together before, you don't always know the quality of the combined organization in terms of their work. If somebody or one of these companies is found to have sort of like, poor performance, does that show up on the CPARs of the mentor and the protege? Like, how does that get scored in terms of, or impact their past performance on future work if they don't, sort of do satisfactory work?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I just saw recently an agency putting out questions on whether they should even allow joint ventures at all. Now, I don't know if they have the authority to prevent joint venture offerers. I'm sure there's plenty of people that would argue that you can't, but I know in the past there's been agencies like GSA and others that, and even NIH, I think on COSP 3 initially were trying to get around having to do the joint venture thing, because you're right, they're not really, under the rules, they're kind of separate entities. They're subcontractors. The joint venture is really just a shell. They don't combine their employees or things like that. They just kind of filter it through to the two partners to the joint venture. And so there is obviously a risk there if something goes wrong, that you're, as the mentor, you're jointly and separately liable for performance of that contract. On the CPARs, I mean, a lot of these are separate entities. So in a way, those are getting their own CPARs, but there's got to be a way for both parties to also be able to at least claim that, because the actual performance is being done by the joint venture partners. Typically the joint venture entity itself doesn't have any employees. It's just like a pass through. So that's a very good question on how that plays out in terms of who gets the blame if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a party of one of those joint ventures and you're doing great work, you want to make sure you can use that past performance in the future. But if it's not going to show up as a hit on your CPARs, you might just walk away from it and pretend it didn't happen if you didn't perform well, and it would never show up anywhere. But it's just sort of a interesting question of, does it show up regardless, or does the company have sort of some latitude to decide if they want to use it or not, I guess.
Yep, and it also, you do have, the CPARs process is not public, and it has, the back and forth that I'm sure if there was ever an issue, are the parties going to start blaming each other? It wasn't me, it was them, pointing fingers at each other. And that certainly has been an issue. There's been litigation where there's been scorched earth things where the parties were just at each other's throats. There was a recent case where the protege tried to basically fire the mentor and take away their subcontract, and the court, one of the circuits said, you're not dealing with them in good faith. You're not allowed to do that. And they didn't allow them to do that, basically. So there's a lot of, it may sound great, but you also got to understand what you're getting yourself into when you enter into a joint venture agreement. You're both kind of liable, and you're kind of connected at the hip, almost married, going forward, for at least for the contract that you're performing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, great. Well, we do have time for a few questions that I'll pull from the audience. One of the questions is around, what signals we might start to see from the administration in terms of their approach to procurement policy and small business policy. Any recommendations or sort of indicators that you'd have for what people should look for? Is it when, somebody who is the head of OFPP is appointed, and some months after that, or the new SPA leader comes in? Like, what would be your sort of recommendations on when we might start to see what that guidance and how that guidance shapes up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the overall, the government has met the small business prime contracting goal every year now since 2013. So throughout the Obama years, and then the Trump years, and then throughout the Biden years, politically, small businesses is popular. So they're going to want to make sure that continues. I think that the changes will be kind of at the margins in terms of, do they push hub zone more than they used to? Do they limit SDB, like I said? How aggressive they are going to be about, like, the Rule of Two applying, and also Mentor-Protégé Joint Ventures? Are going to be any dialing back of any of that? And that'll be once, again, once the inauguration happens, once the political's in place, we'll be looking for SBA proposed rules telling us where they want to go with any of their programs. And that's where I would look, what happens to these rules 6 months from now or 8 months from now, when they finally start to come out under the Trump administration. And then, of course, they've talked about, when I was there during the first Trump administration, like removing 2 rules for every one, and sometimes they say 10. It didn't really work because sometimes, Congress passes a law, you kind of have to implement it in some way, and that's a rule. But I would think there's an opportunity there to kind of get rid of regulations, even at the SBA, that are onerous, that don't make sense, that are burdensome. I would think they would want to, going forward, cut out some of the regulations and some of the reporting and some of the compliance to the extent they can. That would be some of the ideas I would expect to see from them.
Great. And I guess we'll take one last question. I know we have a number of other ones, so maybe I'll send those to you, and we can reply offline to some of these folks. There's a question around, someone who's working for a small business part-time and is an owner in that business. Are they allowed to work for another company while that small business sort of establishes enough business to fund the full-time for the owner? What does that sort of environment look like for someone that's looking to start a business but still needs to sustain themselves with income from some other business?
Yeah, I think that rule, like if you're trying to be certified SDVO or women-owned or 8A company, that recent rule that just became effective on the 3rd talks about when you can have outside employment and how you can overcome the presumption. I think the biggest issue there is, from my perspective, is not, can you do that? The answer should be yes, especially if it's really a startup and you're the only one running your startup business. The concern, or what they're looking for, is a situation where you're a veteran, let's say, and you claim you're running the business, but you work somewhere else, and there's a non-veteran who also works at this small business, who appears to have a lot of experience and or she is possibly actually running it. So that they're trying to prevent ineligible people from running these businesses. So as long as there's no one else there, you should be able to convince SBA that it's okay, that it's a startup, and you're gonna, you're working somewhere else until you get the business up off the ground. It's just they're looking for those situations where there might be something going on that ineligible people might be benefiting is the main focus that they should have.
Great. All right. Well, Ken, we're up on time. I just want to thank you so much for lending your expertise and time to this discussion and the contribution of the JMU Federal Dukes. We're gonna just wrap up with just a couple slides here first. JMU Federal Dukes is a volunteer organization. We do have volunteer opportunities if you're interested in helping us with putting on events like this, or our communication strategies and enablement, or alumni engagement. We would welcome your help and assistance. So please reach out to us. You'll see some contact information on how to do that in just a moment. I did just want to take another moment to thank ShorePoint and Matt Brown for their support of the JMU Federal Dukes, and obviously for Matt's leadership contributions to the JMU Federal Dukes Association as well. So Matt, thank you so much for your sponsorship. If you're looking to learn more about JMU Federal Dukes, please check us out on our website. We have email. We also have a LinkedIn group that we would encourage you to join. We do, about a handful of events each year. Typically they're webinars. We do have some in-person events. We've got a pretty good lineup of events coming soon in the early part of this year. So please stay tuned. If you're interested in other events like this, we'll be sharing those as we get them teed up. And follow along. We have a number of opportunities to connect with us through social media and stay connected to us in terms of what we're doing. If you're wondering about the slides today and the recording, they will be posted on our website at jmufederaldukes.com. We will have the recording available for you to watch, and we will send the slides in a PDF format to all those who attended today as well. Thanks again, Ken. Thanks, Matt, for your sponsorship, and everybody, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time, and please feel free to provide us feedback on this session. If there's other sessions you'd like to have that are like this, we're open to suggestions. Thank you so much, and have a good day.